Oh boy, oh boy. I have not covered this channel in a hot moment. Not since like 2020, I think. It has been like 2 years, and the channel's grown a little bit. I think last time I covered this person, they had like 3 or 4 thousand subs, and it was punching down back then. But now they've gone all the way up to 13.5k subs. Now you're probably wondering why I haven't named the particular channel that we're going to be watching.
You can't define what a woman.
Well, they did a collab with Ariel Scarcella, so that's a good start. Let me go ahead and show you who we're going to be responding to. I don't think I'm allowed to say. I don't think I'm allowed to say this person's name. But there you go. Their name is The Offensive Teesler. I do get it. 'Cause the joke is because they're offensive, and they end it with a slur. So like, the name itself proves itself right because the name itself is offensive, but it also contains the like moniker The Offensive. So it's like, it's pretty good. Edgy. I know, right? Aren't you guys triggered right now? Aren't you guys like literally seething and ripping your hair out? This should be triggering you right now. You should be. Let's continue on then. So this person has uploaded plenty of content more recently, and I'm sure it's very bad, very cringe. Look at all of this. Oh my god, actually this one got a lot of views. Damn, the Ariel Scarcella collab. Getting a decent amount of viewers recently. This is gonna be one of the big channels. Look at that. Look at that, 124k subs. Tapping in on it. This is gonna be one of those big new True Scum channels. I'm telling you, keep an eye out for him. With that said, he uploaded a video back in December 29th, 2021 that people sent me. This one is one that they specifically wanted me to watch for some reason. I don't know why this one is particularly special, but okay. It is called What is Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria? Now, for those of you guys that don't know, rapid onset gender dysphoria is a debunked theory that has long since been completely abandoned by the scientific community at large. That is an idea, is basically this social contagion idea. Like, if you've heard the idea that being trans or gay or LGBT of any kind is like a social contagion, that like it's something that's kind of like a trend spreading among young people, and that's where it's coming from. That's more or less what it claims. And the existence of said rapid onset gender dysphoria comes from a survey that was done on a TERF website of parents of trans kids, quote unquote, or at least that's the people who took the survey claimed they were. Not exactly the strongest of scientific studies, not exactly the best group to select from, not exactly the largest group to even, like, not even the best, like, group to test on to begin with, but regardless, they've run with this idea that being trans is a social contagion. The existence of things like TikTok has played a large part in this because there's this whole narrative right now that like TikTok is brainwashing shit tons of these mostly young girls into being one or more of these things I'm going to list: non-binary, trans, having DID, having PTSD, and then list other like mental like things, right? Like, there's this whole narrative that like there's shit tons of specifically young girls being like socially convinced through the placebo effect or something into thinking they have these things, right? Now, no doubt there is like a weird kind of culture around like glorifying disabilities on Tourette's is a good one, yeah, around glorifying disabilities on TikTok. It is a thing that exists, and it is cringy and probably a problem, but I don't really take it seriously. It's not like a threat to me because I remember Tumblr. Like, Tumblr was literally around for like what, 12, 15 years before it died because they got rid of porn. Like, I promise you, if there wasn't an epidemic of this happening for real that was like long lasting and substantial from the Tumblr era, then it's not going to happen from the TikTok era. If there are kids that are thinking that they're trans and they're like thinking about transitioning and they end up desisting, then chances are they aren't getting far enough to actually detransition, in any really, like meaningful way. And not to mention, as long as we keep on fighting against Republicans and access to gender affirming care becomes more and more accessible to people all across the country and across the world, the rate of misdiagnosis of gender dysphoria is going to go down. When you see detransitioners, most of them are older. They're older and their transition started a long time ago, back when access to gender affirming care and research on these topics was much less well fleshed out. Now it is. Now we have a more fleshed out understanding of this, and the scientific consensus is pretty hard set on trans people being valid, just in a broad sense. On top of that, we have to consider the fact that there is no real evidence that we have an epidemic of young people being convinced they have fake disabilities due to TikTok. It reminds me of like the video games make people violent thing, you know? It's funny that the same people who argue against the video games make people violent point are now making the argument that TikTok is making kids think they have disabilities. And it's true that mass hysteria is a real thing and it exists and stuff like that can happen. It just doesn't seem like it's happening on that scale. Let's watch the video though. Take it away, the offensive Tiesler.
Rapid-onset gender dysphoria is a fake concept that basically claims that being transgender is a social contagion and can be caused by social influence among friendship groups. It's not a real thing.
Historically, the diagnosis gender dysphoria was predominantly found within biological males. In the last 10 years, however, there has been an explosion with young girls seeking help at trans clinics wanting to transition. Is this a natural increase? Rapid-onset gender dysphoria, or ROG for short, is a new term to describe a young girl after puberty suddenly identifying as trans, even though they have no history of gender dysphoria.
Oh, I should say, by the way, there's like two halves of the transphobia coin, okay? So for a long time, transphobia was heavily focused on shitting on trans women because trans women are this like almost perfect target, right? You can frame trans women as being delusional, predatory men, and you can frame them in unflattering caricatures that will intentionally, in their design, revolt people when you make memes or political comics. And you can use that to convince people to have a more hostile opinion of trans people in general. But that's what you can do with like trans women. And that's been the focus of the right and transphobes for a really long time. It's heavily focused on trans women. But now we're sort of moving into a new age of this idea that trans men, or at least every trans man that isn't the trans man making the video, because of course this trans man is valid, it's the other trans men that aren't valid. They're just all a bunch of young girls trying to escape being sexually harassed by men, so they're taking hormones and changing their bodies in massive ways because that's exactly how that works. Guarantee he'll make that argument, by the way. Guarantee he'll make that argument. Mark my words. I haven't pre-watched this shit, by the way. I don't pre-watch anything that I do on stream, but I guarantee I'll make that argument. Every single time I talk to a TERF, they make the argument that trans men are women who are transitioning to escape the prejudice they face from men, whether it be like the risk of sexual assault, groping, just the general things that women have to face in society by being women, being generally taken less seriously. Generally being seen as a man by society has its ups and its privileges. And so people like this will interpret that as meaning that trans men and AFAB non-binary people must be women who are trying to change themselves and make themselves be seen as more masculine to avoid predatory men. That's what they think. Guarantee. I'll say that in this video.
Dysphoria. A girl who's heavily influenced by her peers, her politics, and the online world. Dr. Lisa Lippman is a controversial woman who started to study these unusual numbers of girls.
Oh, by the way, I should mention right now, rapid onset gender dysphoria has about as much scientific backing as Flat Earth does. This is not something that needs like strong debunking. Like it's just, it doesn't. There's like the biggest studies that have been done on rapid onset gender dysphoria are studies and analysis done to debunk it, because it's very much like it's just a made-up thing. It's not real. The phenomenon that it's meant to describe could be real, but the idea that this is a massive epidemic or a generalized social contagion has not been substantiated in any way, shape, or form.
girls suddenly announcing that they're trans that statistically didn't add up or make sense.
Oh my god, did you also know that before gay marriage became legal in most states, there were less people out as gay? But then after they made gay marriage legal, all of a sudden, there's so many more people coming out as gay. Who could have expected this? Who could have possibly predicted such a thing? It must be that when you make being gay, gay marriage legal, it makes more people gay. It's the only explanation. The only explanation. Or possibly trans men who, and I only really know this due to sort of like cultural osmosis through like the trans community and stuff like that. From my understanding, trans men tend to be like the most stealth of stealth generally. Like a trans dude who's like trying to just, you know, go about their day and not have someone fuck with them will usually like kind of wear a hoodie and just kind of like, when you're trying to dude it up and look kind of like, you know, just a dude going about their day, you can just throw on a hoodie and like, you know, messy hair and just kind of like not shave, and like it's a little easier, you know. And so trans dudes don't really get like clocked or talked about that much. It's just not really that big of a thing. Trans women, on the other hand, have sort of a different ballpark in front of them. Trans women sort of have this, from my understanding, this in many cases, I'm not speaking for everybody here to be completely clear, but a lot of trans women seem to feel this inherent need to like fit into every social standard associated with womanhood possible and be as loud about it as possible, to make it at the very least clear to everybody who sees her that she's trying her best at least. Would you guys agree? Especially if you're a trans woman in chat, was that like a good wording for like the general like difference there? Like if you're a trans guy, you can kind of like, I'm not saying it's not work or anything, but you're kind of, it's a little, trans women, much like cis women, have a little bit more that they have to do. Makeup, hair, clothing, weight's a big part of it as well. Well, I guess if you take like the right hormones, maybe then if you ate more, then maybe it'd make fat distribution go to where you want it to go. I don't know. I'm not trans, and most of this has been research done specifically to debunk transphobes. This guy is trans, and every trans person that I've debated on this likes to use their own personal experience as a trans person as an argument, but they never actually like make an argument. Usually it's like, oh, I'm trans and you're not, thus I'm right. It's never like, oh, I'm trans and this happened to me and this was my experience, and so I think you should consider this perspective. It's always like, I'm trans, you're cis, thus I'm correct. And I don't respect that. I'm sorry, but if this guy makes a response video to me and his response is this cis guy, then I don't care. I fucked your mom and I'm your dad. And I'm disappointed in you. Be more progressive.
Sense. She published her research at Brown University, where she was a researcher at the time, but the university got so much backlash that they replaced her studies, her research, her work with an apology.
So something that conservatives like to do a lot with this is they'll point to something like, they do this a lot when it comes to like race and IQ studies as well. They'll point to some like previously well-respected or semi-well-respected academic who suddenly comes out with some extremely out of nowhere, completely unfounded, unsubstantiated, unbacked up crackpot book or theory. I think there was this one John Hopkins scientist that had like written something about like race and IQ, and people freaked out about it, like, oh, this must be so fucking true. Oh my god, this guy seems like he's got such a great resume. Turns out it was all bullshit. Sometimes you can be a very smart person and have, yeah, the bell curve guy too. Yeah, I might have been thinking of the bell curve. Sorry, I might have been thinking of somebody else. Regardless, just because you're brilliant in one field does not automatically mean you've got the best positions or automatically have the most knowledge or even enough knowledge in other fields, right? You know, an engineer may not necessarily be the best person to go to about like whether or not a horse can drink.
Welcome to capitalism, my dude.
Asterisk
Kool-Aid.
Sasha Star Asterisk
I
has
don't know.
donated asterisk $10.
Sasha Star, thanks for the $10. I appreciate that. What'd you say?
Welcome to capitalism, my dude.
Son claims that he fucked my mom. At least that means I am no longer her biggest disappointment.
Damn. That was a good one, Sasha Star. You got me there. That was pretty good. That was pretty good, Sasha Star. You got me there. That was pretty fucking good. I thought for a second, I was like, shit, she got me.
Trans activist. This new term, Raj, is a taboo.
Anyway, so basically, sometimes you'll get this like very brilliant or at least somewhat well-respected academic in at a university or whatever who will suddenly put out a claim or a theory, or not a theory, a hypothesis or like a statement that is about like race and IQ, or about like how gay people are like being gay is a mental illness, or like how being trans is a mental illness or a social contagion. And because none of this is even at all backed up by science, so there's that. It's clearly politically motivated, and there's that. And not only that, but the contents of said incorrect politically motivated claims are also extremely like harmful to be putting out, especially as somebody who just because their name has a level of credibility to them. And so yes, in many cases, these organizations and these universities and whatnot will expel some people who push these ideas. It is not like a agenda that's being pushed and anyone who dares to step out of line. It's like if you had a scientist who was insisting the earth was flat, who was working for NASA and was just insisting every fucking day, and he was working at his like control station and was like changing all of his functions and his goddamn calculations to account for the earth being flat or something, you'd want that guy to get fired. I'm sorry, but like, yeah, the guy wasn't doing his fucking job. The guy was spreading rhetoric and using his platform and using his degree to spread misinformation, and they didn't want to support that. They were the ones funding him, and they were the ones employing him. They didn't want to support it.
Within the LGBT and trans community, the community consider rapid-onset gender dysphoria.
By the way, these are the same people who say Bill Nye isn't a real scientist, so we shouldn't take him seriously when he talks about climate change.
As a myth. Apparently, anything that counters the trans narrative is a myth and hate speech.
You can't come up with a term and a way to describe a group of people if you've not even included that group of people in your research.
I'm glad you brought this up, my friend, because I have a clip for you, a girl talking about her experience with rapid-onset gender.
You know what they say. Data is just the plural of anecdote, right?
Dysphoria.
All happened very, very rapidly around the time I was 15. And when I look back on that, I see the roots in me joining online communities, particularly Tumblr, and kind of distancing myself from friends in real life and peers in real life, and just kind of getting really embroiled in this community online, where everything was about social justice, everything was about gender all the time. And there was these hierarchical ways of looking at people. Like, it was bad to be a...
Honestly, I actually do think there's a point here. A little bit of a point here. There are a lot of kids that are just being let loose on the internet, and YouTube or Tumblr or Reddit or whatever the fuck is the kid's babysitter. They're being let loose on the internet at like really young ages, and just whatever communities they're falling into are where they end up. And I know it sounds like it'd be a good thing for like a 12-year-old to go online and end up in some lefty Tumblr community, but like, let's be real, that probably can have some negative effects. That can have some negative effects. I mean, in this case, it would seem, assuming this lady isn't just some grifting piece of shit who's just going out to like, make money shitting on trans people, claiming like. Also, listen, I don't usually comment on people's appearances, but like, you'd think if somebody had like had rapid onset gender dysphoria and had transitioned and then detransitioned and was like becoming a public figure talking about it, you'd think you'd be able to like tell at all, right? Like, I kind of feel like what probably happened was like she went on Tumblr and then thought for a while she was non-binary or a guy, and then wore some like dressed tomboyishly for a while, and then realized it was a phase and then got out of it. Like, I may be wrong, little hummingbird. I may be wrong, but I feel like that might have been what happened.
A cis, not trans, straight white girl. And that's what I was. I was a straight white girl. And I felt that that was very bad at the time, being in these communities. So eventually that, combined with my mental health issues,
I thought being a cis, straight white girl was bad? What communities are you talking about? What kind of like the real... Listen, if you're in a community where like they hate you for being a cis straight white woman and that is bad, you're not in a contemporary mainstream trans activist quote unquote community.
Welcome to
You're in
capitalism,
some dark, dense,
Trans_gal
fucking
has donated $5.
soggy corner of Reddit, okay? Some soggy fucking corner of Reddit or Tumblr, all right? You're in a dank fucking soggy moldy corner of Tumblr, okay? You're in like the trans version of Hoteps.
A lot of body image issues. I was very socially self-conscious. That all kind of combined together and resulted in me originally identifying as non-binary, but over the course of a few years, it kind of just snowballed into full-on trans.
If you've noticed, I have a lovely book in the background, a controversial book, Irreversible Damage, that I'm currently reading, and I want to talk about Sally. Sally grew up with two brothers, and she was a classic tomboy. Her parents thought that she might come out as a lesbian at one point, and she eventually did and fell in love. Unfortunately, Sally's brother got into a horrible car accident and got addicted to pain meds that later on turned into a heroin.
All right. I want to make a little statement here very quickly, all right? Everything that I substantiate my points with are data and meta-analyses. If you want to go back to basically any broader video I've done on trans topics, you can see like the data that I pull from. We've done like research on stream before. Like we use data, we use studies, meta-analyses. There's a whole fucking research document. If you're a regular watcher here, you already know this, but if you're new, then this might just be good for you to know. I like to get my opinions on these topics from data, research, studies, things like that, right? Like the actual scientific consensus, what the smartest people in the world who have the best possible tools and resources at their disposal to study something like this in a large scale, what they have found about it. And that's where I derive my opinions. And my opinions will change if new data, new evidence comes up to contradict what I currently believe. I like to think how being a reasonable human being works. This person, however, is a demagogue. I don't know if it's because he's very personally bought into this idea that there is a huge problem here. I don't know if it's for money and popularity. I don't care. I really don't. I don't give a shit at all. I don't give a fuck. What I do know is, what I know for sure is that this guy knows what he's doing. He's taking anecdotes, which is what that book is full of, and what he's already brought up here. Anecdotes, single stories, very sad stories, I'm sure. Detransitioner stories are always very unfortunate. And pushing them in a way twisting them so that he can push them in a way that presents a certain narrative. Now, the truth of stories like this is that for a very long time, access to gender-affirming care and any information on it has been basically inaccessible. There's been a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation and hostility out there for a very long time. It's only been fairly recently that a broader amount of people have had more steady and reliable access to like a pretty strong foundational understanding of trans issues. And because of this, we've seen massive amounts of trans acceptance in the last few years, even if we're also seeing massive amounts of trans non-acceptance. Like the right is pushing back too. Don't get me wrong. The TERFs, the true scums, the right in general, they're all pushing back, but the left is pushing harder and always has and always will. Regardless, though, all these people have are these tiny little individual stories, and tragedies they may be, they are simply twisted versions of a smaller story that contribute to a larger problem that does exist. Right now, I believe there are only last I checked, there were 52. We checked on stream 6 months ago. There were 52 gender-affirming clinics in the United States of America. Which sounds like, that could be enough, right? 1 per state. And 1 to spare, right? Or 2 to spare. Most of them are clustered in the same states. Blue states, usually. There are some states out there that have literal borders of states around them that don't even have gender-affirming clinics in them. There are some states there where you would have to drive multiple states over just to go to a gender-affirming clinic. And this is a step up from how things have been for the last 10 plus years. 10 years ago, it was something like 15 to 20 or something. It was much less. And you want to go back further, and it's just going to keep on shrinking. Access to gender-affirming care, especially information about it. And because of this, the further back you go, you're going to find a lot of people who were false positively either diagnosed with gender dysphoria, whose family and parents thought they might have had gender dysphoria, who through personal internet research or goading or suggestions of friends on the internet might believe that they're trans. These are things that might actually happen, and these are things that did happen a lot in the past. However, we've seen, as access to gender-affirming care clinics become more and more accessible, this rate drops. What this person is advocating for right now is for a lessening in access to trans education, in access to trans-affirming care, and access to clinics that offer trans-affirming care. This guy is arguing that there is too much of that is a problem perpetuated by these trans activists that are pushing this, that are causing the whole rapid onset gender dysphoria social contagion problem, right? That's what he believes. In reality, what needs to happen is an expansion of this medical care so that somebody or a parent or anybody who thinks they might have gender dysphoria can go actually talk to a medical professional who knows what they're looking at and knows what they're dealing with much more ease of access. You know? It's easy for rumors and for people, it's easy for someone to assume that they need a root canal or something falsely if there's only like 50 dentists in the entire country and access to information about basic dental hygiene has only really been online and accessible to people broadly for like the last 5 years, you know? People might start to think, you know, they need a root canal when they don't. So I understand that. That's the best comparison I can make. I try to do an analogy that's comparable to the whole gender transition stuff.
Addiction. Shortly after, Sally got dumped and got her heart broken. She went to a few therapists, and one in particular concluded that Sally was trans. Because, you know, girls can't be masculine or tomboys. They have to transition to men. That's the society we live in. Great. It led into...
I always love this, by the way. This insistence that, like, the left is claiming there can't be masculine girls or tomboys. Nobody is saying this. Because one fucking therapist fucked up. A therapist who, by the sounds of it, did not have the qualifications to be diagnosing people with gender dysphoria, did that. All of a sudden, this means that we need to completely cut off access to gender-affirming care. Kids cannot be allowed to know about trans people. Go down the list.
Sally being in contact with a girl who had top...
I should mention, by the way, this person's friends with Ariel Scarcella, and at least from what I saw of his channel, seems to be a fan of Matt Walsh's What is a Woman documentary, so... yeah, he's a pretty colossal piece of shit, I'd say.
Surgery, and helped her come out to her parents as trans. Sally's parents got concerned and expressed them doubting her trans identity. Sally moved to New York and got friends with a group of trans people. Sally wrote an email to her parents saying that she did not feel safe and she found them toxic. And she will no longer be in contact with them. I know that parents don't know everything, but they're not...
Hey, chat, can I tell you something before the offensive T-slur here says it? I'm about to say something that's true, but I'm going to say it before the offensive T-slur here says it, because I think you want to hear it from my mouth instead of his. The trans community, as a product of the extremely common abusive upbringings many trans people have, and LGBT people in general have, just broadly, due to societal unacceptance and whatnot, has led to a somewhat prominent issue in which LGBT people who are financially in a bad place will come together to be roommates, to work together to, like, you know, pay off, you know, a situation or whatever, you know, to be able to live together and be roommates and whatnot. And it's common, and usually it's going to be fine, but there has been cases in which, and a lot of these, and when these cases happen, they become very popular. You can look on the internet to find some of these examples. But when these cases happen, where there's like abuse or like some weird, like manipulative type of behavior going on, it tends to like, it can happen, right? And then a good example of this was the Izzy Bear thing. Do you guys remember the Izzy Bear thing? Izzy Bear was this trans woman who made content on Twitch, who had this big roommate house type thing going on with a bunch of other, you know, neurodivergent LGBT people, mostly trans from my understanding. And, you know, me and her got into an argument on Twitter. She claimed that I was transphobic and, you know, she's a woke scold and all that. And we had an argument about it and all that. A year later, her roommates come out to expose her as an abuser who would not only take all of their money and spend it on cigarettes, ATVs, and hot wings. Yes, that is true. That's what you would spend them on when they needed money for like the rent or for like paying the like for like there was like the furnace thing they had, I guess, like a furnace for the heating and stuff. Like she was stealing their like the money that they had for like piling together for paying for things in this house. And whenever they'd confront her about it, she would use this sort of ATVs. Yes, she would use this sort of like, oh, you're being ableist. I have PTSD. You can't confront me like this. You're being ableist. This is ableist. Like, and would go down like the whole like woke scold victim sort of thing, you know, where they play the victim. That whole thing, right? And that's just one example of like cases where this has happened. Wait a minute, there are no abusive or manipulative relationships in cis-het relationships. I'll get to that in a moment, Heather. Obviously, stuff like this happens in like cis-het scenarios and whatnot, but for some reason, it seems like the internet is obsessed with like Tumblrite, non-binary, or trans like roommate situations going to hell, and it having something to do with like mental illness. And whenever it happens, it ends up being like a really big thing. Who remembers Final Fantasy House? I think that's a good example too. Wasn't Final Fantasy House a good example of this? Like that shit was like all over the internet. Everyone was talking about that. Like, I don't know. It just seems like scenarios like that can sometimes happen as a product of the fact that so many LGBT people are looking for a place to live and financial security because so many young queer people get kicked out of their house or disowned by their parents, or hell, in some cases get denied employment due to their sexuality or their gender identity. And so in that case, sometimes LGBT people kind of have to come together and roommate it up sometimes, and situations like that can sometimes lead to abuse. And it seems like the internet is an obsession with kind of platforming and boosting those examples and turning them into memes. And so I feel the need to point out that we're probably going to get a vague reference to stuff like that here. And it is a thing that happens. I think I'd be dishonest if I denied the existence of it, but it's not like this overwhelming fucking thing that's happening in the queer community that's like a thing that's got to be fought against or something. If anything, what we need to fight against is the broader societal hatred towards queer people that's making it so that so many young queer or LGBT people are finding themselves in a situation where they have to be dependent on others because they can't be dependent on their families or their friends or on themselves because our society just isn't at that point yet.
They're not completely irrelevant from the conversation regarding their own kids. Usually, us individuals, we know what's best for us, and we know what we're feeling, but some individuals are far into an ideology, brainwashed, you can say, that other people who are not them, they know better what's best for them. If that makes sense.
So what he's suggesting here is that parents should always be the final say on whether or not a kid can transition, because this is the popular like conservative belief, and the conservatives obviously don't want to allow any potential children they have to transition. Of course, they want to make it so that in red states, the local governments have the ability to instill policies, as they have been doing, to take away access to gender-affirming care. I mean, recently I know they're pushing that bill right now in Texas to ban kids from drag shows of any kind, regardless of their like age appropriateness. And the wording of the bill itself states that trans women and drag queens are a threat to children. Like, that's the wording of the bill that's being pushed. Like, people like this are just trying to shovel more shit into the mouths of the goblins that watch their content and just want to hear a trans person tell them that the trans community is going too far. However, there is a whole other segment of the audience that's watching this content that also has to be talked about, because I feel as though I'm kind of neglecting that audience, and that's like the actual true scums, right? The actual like trans people, or like somewhat trans, kind of like pro-trans-ish people that feel as though the trans activists have just taken it too far now, and that if we don't reel things in, then the transphobes are going to win, and it's going to be a disaster. There are some trans people who genuinely feel like that, who feel like the rest of the trans community is too crazy and has gone too far. And I don't agree that that's the case, but I do think there's some validity there. If you're trans and you feel that way, like that you don't really feel like you belong in the trans community because it's so, let's be honest, so politically radical. But I think it's politically radical for good reasons. The point I'd make is that just because you're trans doesn't mean you need to be a political figure, right? You don't need to be a political Andy just because you're trans. You can have like strong political positions, but like, yeah, I don't know. I just find that like you get a lot of like true scum types that clearly don't want any part in politics, but just because they're trans, they feel like they have to be a part of politics, and they don't want any part of the group that is making big waves. And that's what the left is doing. That's what the trans activists are doing. They're making big waves, and that's really inconvenient for them.
Sense. If the parents to a child who potentially deal with Raj can't see an improvement with their child's mental health after transitioning, I think it's completely fine to question the transition itself. It does not make them transphobic. I've heard many stories like Sally's where the trans community want individuals.
I don't think that like purely questioning a child's transition, like just that is transphobic. Like the idea of questioning, like, could this 5-year-old be just going through I don't think that's transphobic. Like wondering that or considering that. The right will do this thing, or I mean, people like this in general will do this thing. Will try to frame the left broadly as being far more ravenous than it really is. Like, don't get me wrong. There are some rabid fucking vultures on the left that are always circling over ahead, waiting for you to say one word wrong, one slip up, one thing they can clip out of context to make you look bad. Don't get me wrong, that's a real thing. And there are some insane people who hold some pretty insane beliefs, but like, if we're actually talking about the broader contemporary, like, mainstream trans movement, nobody out there is saying that you can't be a tomboy. Nobody out there is saying that there's no such thing as detransitioners. No one out there is saying that it's impossible for a kid to mistakenly believe they're trans. Like, come on.
To break all contact with their parents and being trans circles instead, and in that way you can't ignore the similarities between the trans community and a cult. To explain.
There it is. Because this one person fell in with a group of people who were manipulative and abusive and isolated her from her family and her friends. That means the whole trans community is a cult. You understand what they're doing here, right? When I say they, I mean this in the broadest sense possible. This guy, the conservatives, the TERFs, the transphobes, broadly all across the spectrum. What they're doing here is trying to frame, well, if you're like a full-on conservative and believe no trans people are valid, then you're trying to frame this as being all trans people. But if you're doing this, but if you're like a true scum and you believe that only some trans people are valid, then you're doing this for like most trans people. Then what he's doing here is trying to claim that there is this epidemic of copycats that want attention and want to pretend like they're trans for some indescribable social credit. You could try to ask these people what they'd get out of it. Like, what would they really get out of it? Especially, like, what would a trans woman really get out of pretending to be a woman? Like attention, like, really, like, what substantially? They couldn't really give you much. The most they can give you for trans men is to escape misogyny. Sure, okay, fine, yeah, totally, yeah. That's exactly what you'd think there'd be more women doing it though, right? Like being more masculine or like transitioning to escape misogyny. I don't know. You might think that maybe the problem here is misogyny, even, you know? You might even start to think about whether or not the real problem here is misogyny and not who you believe to be the women transitioning into men to avoid it. That's what I really have a question about. Why is this video about like attacking these supposedly these young women who are being brainwashed into thinking they're trans for being trans trenders or whatever, instead of the supposed, well, I won't actually say supposed because this is true, the extremely misogynistic patriarchal society that women have to deal with? Why not deal with that, and then the rapid onset gender dysphoria thing goes away? If it's real, that is, then it goes away. And then we're not bullying teens on TikTok who may or may not, in your mind, be trans. Wouldn't that be a better way to go about it? I think that would be a better strategy, personally. That's how I do it.
Explain the difference between regular gender dysphoria, that's in transsexuals, and rapid onset gender dysphoria, that's in detransitioners, actually. I'm going to use my own story as an example. I was the weird kid. I had a big lack of inner peace. Everyone knew. I apparently hated the school I went to, even though I did have friends, and I wasn't bullied. I just had to be mad at someone, you know. When I got older, I cut all my hair off, and I started to wear baggy clothes. I needed to look more butch. That was the goal. And it did help make me feel better a little bit, but I was still quite miserable because I could not understand what I was going through and have always felt. And after a long time, when I finally could put into words what I was feeling, I never looked back. The process of my physical transition made my lack of inner peace go completely away. And I am, for the first time in my life, happy. I've never been happier. Girls with Raj, they do not have the same experience. Not at all.
I have a question. All right, any trans dudes in chat who can confirm this for me? Do most trans dudes get put on like a performance-enhancing, like a significantly performance-enhancing level of testosterone? Like if some guy on the street, the average dude, walked in to a clinic, got his blood level tested, found out what his blood testosterone level was, and then got put on testosterone to be at like an above average level for the purposes of bulking up, right? How close would the average trans guy taking T be to that guy's dose? Because if it's close, then I gotta wonder, why are trans dudes not eating like 5 pounds of food every day and pumping iron in their free time? You're basically like on a like getting steroids pumped into your body. Essentially. Like if you listen, my man, it's time. All right? You've got literal like juice running through your veins right now. All right? It's all about calories and whatnot. Just got to get those calories in and got to go to the gym. I've been trying to work my calories up. That's the hardest thing. Working out for me is not the hardest part. It's not. Working out isn't that hard. It's just manual, like pushing myself to like the point of exhaustion, then recovering and doing it again has never been hard for me. I just put on like a podcast or music in the background and like I just kind of phase out and I like wake up after my set and it's like, ooh, okay, yeah, I'm definitely done with that pump. The problem that I've had is getting the food in. You can't grow without the food. It really is just about getting the calories in. You can't get bigger. You can't get bigger muscles. You can't just generally get more muscle on your body, more frame, anything like that without getting more calories in. And I've just been missing so many fucking meals, dude. I really need to get like one of those Fitbits that like wakes you up like beep, 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 time to eat. I gotta like shove food down my throat. I have to be eating like every 4 hours, like ideally for what I want to do because I've got such a fast metabolism. It's actually insane how fast my metabolism is. It's not fair. It's if I wanted to just be a skinny guy and eat whatever I wanted, it'd be fair. But I'm trying to like become somewhat bulky, and it is very hard when you have a fast metabolism. You have to eat so much fucking food. Enjoy it while you can. I mean, I'm gonna be force feeding myself.
They're heavily influenced by LGBT and trans discourse online that they almost forget about the real world. A certain ideology is followed, and they are taught to consider being cis, straight, and white a bad thing. Many of them are.
There is a certain level of that in lefty communities online where being like cis, straight, and white is a negative thing and being part of a marginalized group, or the more like points or check boxes you have, like the more just baseline respect people in lefty spaces will have for you. But I think that's more of an internal bias thing or an overcorrection, more so than an outright bigotry on the scale of what this guy is sort of framing it to be.
Are bisexual or lesbian girls, but they have a hard time accepting it. Or it could also be they don't get enough minority or oppression points that their community really value. I know looks can be irrelevant, but it's easy to know.
Can you imagine, for the sake of oppression points on the internet, transitioning, taking hormones, changing your name, your pronouns, your never contacting your mutuals again, whole new all that shit, just to get attention? Imagine, dude.
Notice how these girls all look the same. They dye their hair in an unnatural color, face filled with piercings, especially here, and they also have the same clothes.
Listen, dog. All I'm going to say here is you've literally got like the little cross earring thing on, and I've literally never once in my life, not a fucking hint. Here, let me turn on the other light so you can see better. Not a fucking hint of a piercing. Not a hint of a piercing on my fucking earlobes. Not on my earlobes, not on my lips, not on my nose, neither side of my nose. I've never gotten a piercing. The closest I've ever gotten is bleached hair that's been toned white, all right? Listen, you can't be throwing rocks from glass houses here, okay?
Clothing style. Something I've noticed personally.
Also, to be clear, by the way, there's a very, very reasonable explanation for why trans people, like gay people, like especially young LGBT AFAB people online, tend to kind of fall into a certain aesthetic. And the reason is quite simple. When your sexuality and or gender and like all that are seen as like otherly or like an other by society, you're seen as like a weird or an outcast by society just for who you are, then you are much more likely to just not really care and to sort of dress and present yourself in more rebellious ways because your sheer existence is already pissing off and offending society. Why should you give a shit what anyone thinks beyond that point, right? It's sort of a Giga Chad fully go, like literally just fully accepting who you are kind of thing. And also, who doesn't want to clap a girl with fat butt cheeks and big old titties and dyed hair with half of it shaved off, right? I like clapping them cheeks. Let's go.
Is how they all live at home. They decorate the room the same way. They have like posters, I don't know of what, and they have this LED lights in a certain way. They also watch anime or anything like that. I don't know much about it. And some also.
Okay, you're going a little bit far now, right? You were on like a contemporary conservative position, like haha, blue hair, piercings, whatever. But now you're going down the LED lights in the room and watching anime thing, right? Are you gonna start talking about trans girls coding and wearing thigh-high socks now? Like, Jesus Christ.
Identifies asexual. Gender dysphoria is an internal fight and has nothing to do with other people. Real transsexuals are politically diverse in general. We all live different lives, and we don't necessarily.
Hey guys, listen. We need to talk about this agenda that is brainwashing young men online. They're going on the internet, and they're talking about wanting to be like fictional characters. They're hyper-obsessing and spending dozens of hours, if not sometimes hundreds of hours a week, thousands of hours a year, tens of thousands of hours a year, playing computer games, video games. They use this language and they lock themselves in their room in the dark. You could literally do this whole thing about video games. This is just a moral panic over a popular thing, okay? It's the same fucking shit. It's just a moral panic over a popular thing. Every time a thing is being talked about in the media, a moral panic gets started about it. 99.99% of the time, just as effective as antibacterial hand sanitizer, it's started by conservatives. The moral panics are always started by conservatives.
Necessarily have trans friends or are in trans groups. You can't put two trans people together and be like, be friends. That's not how it works. The few trans friends I got, I know them from political situations, political environments, and not because we're trans. All trans aside, cutting and dealing with anorexia or another form of eating disorder are examples of how young girls can be inspired by their peers with the act of self-harm. And yes, I do see a young girl without gender dysphoria cutting her breast off as a form of self-harm. So
God, you could... There's like almost a hint of sincerity there, but it always has to come back around to the propaganda, right? It always has to come back around to the propaganda. It can't ever be, I think we should actually think and possibly consider the cultural state of certain lefty and trans online communities that seems to sort of shame people for being cis. Because there are like, listen guys, even you guys have done the whole Xan is an egg thing where you're like almost like upset that I'm not trans, it seems. I've seen that. Come on. Don't pretend like that hasn't even happened in my own community where like you guys are upset that I'm not trans. Come on. That's happened. And that is possibly a harmful thing to exist in this culture of online. Think about it for a minute. Like, it does yeah, but we're messing with you. You may be messing with me, but are all of you? Is there not even a shred of sincerity in it? There is a little bit of pressure in these communities on cis people to be trans. Like, oh, egg moment. Oh, egg. Oh, egg, egg. Oh, egg moment. Egg moment. Oh, egg moment. Egg, 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 egg moment. Egg moment. Oh, egg moment. Oh, egg moment. Do you have any idea how many times I've seen that comment? If I fucking cross my legs a certain way while I'm streaming, people will comment that on my VODs, okay? Listen, I see that shit, all right? I know it's there. It is a real thing. And this guy could have gone on his video here, and he could have done like a legitimate discussion about that particular cultural tendency and been like, I do think that for some young people that are getting into like lefty communities, this could be a little bit of confusing and disorienting, when I think that discovering your gender identity is something that should be done both with those that you personally trust that know you well, and with if needed, medical professionals that like can ascribe gender affirming care. Like, if that's what this video was, I would have been like, fuck, what am I supposed to say to that? But no, then he has to go all the way into, and yes, I do think it's self-harm if you have a young girl who chops her breasts off. And it's like, there you go, the chopping breasts off. A very, very common strategy with transphobes is to basically take a medical procedure, whether it be bottom surgery, top surgery, go down the list, and try to make it sound as disgusting as possible. So it's like chopping your dick off or lobbing your breasts off, instead of like surgically removing the breasts, or surgically, or vaginoplasty, which is the name of bottom surgery. Like, they have to make it sound scary, almost like it's some sort of mutilation, right? Because that's what they're doing. It's propaganda. They're pushing a narrative. I don't think, at the very least, in making this video, this guy did it with the intention of sincerely pushing a message or helping people who may have this happen to them. And that's possible. It could. Not on a large scale. I don't think it's an epidemic, but it could happen in some isolated cases. It has happened in isolated cases. Instead, it has to be this whole like propaganda bit. He has to go through the whole dialogue tree. Doesn't surprise me, though. This kind of content is a dime a dozen on YouTube. This channel's going to get big, though. Keep an eye out for him. Mark my words. You're going to see him around a lot more. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. It helps my channel a lot more than you even realize, whether you're watching it live, right as it's come out as a video or as a stream, or if you're watching it as it's gone out as a video after the fact. Definitely consider leaving a like. It helps the channel out a lot more than you even realize. And of course, if you want to, support me and get to see more content from me here on YouTube, you can also subscribe and ring the bell icon on YouTube to turn on all notifications, so YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video. You can also follow my social media, all linked down below. And of course, if you want to support me more directly, financially speaking, especially because we're trying to save up money for a new audio setup right now, then you can support me very easily by going to my website, xanderhall.com/live, and doing a variety of things. You can either donate, subscribe for yourself at all sorts of different tiers, which will grant you all sorts of cool little perks, or you can gift subs to other people. You can also support me on YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, and even Patreon, links in the description. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it, and have a good one.